This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. And this week on Behind the Headlines, we have an edition of the Arnold Report. We're being joined, as usual, by Mr. Ed Arnold. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Good to see you, Charlie.
Ed is, of course, the president of and chairman of the Susquehanna Valley Center and is a retired corporate executive in Pennsylvania, one of the leading ones in the country, particularly in the field of trucking. It's so good to have you with us again, Ed.
Good to see you, Charlie.
This week, we have, this month, I should say, we have a whole group of new questions for you. So let's dive right in. Let's start with the first one. Mr. Arnold, I've been reading about risk tolerance and appreciate its importance. How would you advise me on how to determine what my risk tolerance really is in the world of investing?
Okay, I think first of all, I'd have to know really where you stand in what your age is, what your expectations, but specifically really is what can you afford to lose? What is your, in a sense that you've got to, if you had a 10% or 20% drop in your portfolio and it would really upset you, that's one thing. Also, the fact is, are you retired and what are your retirement expenses? What are your expectations in retirement? So therefore, do you go out a lot or do you eat mostly at home? Your retirement debt, are you retired and do you still have debt? So basically, we are in a world that's very risky. At the same time, it still comes back to what are you comfortable with and what is your particular situation?
Okay, all right. The second question we have for you today is from an individual who has an interest in equine sports. He says that I have just been watching the Triple Crown events this year and learned that individuals can now buy shares of top performing thoroughbreds. How can I go about doing this?
Okay, there are several groups that have put together. First of all, I want to explain, in my humble opinion, racetracking, they call it the sport of kings for a reason, because only kings can afford it. That it is a hobby. To expect that you're going to actually get a return on your investment is very questionable. The one thing you could get, though, if you buy it, and there's a few comes pocket races is one of them. There's another one, not too, that there are a few like this that you can buy a small interest. Now, getting realizing that you're going to be own 1% or less than 1% of the racehorse, depending, of course, the price of things. But you could be invited to some track that you could go up to the owner's box or things like this. So there could be a little perks, which are nice. But again, I repeat, this is not an investment. It is a hobby. It's something you enjoy because the probability of making money is not good.
I wonder if this individual saw the fact that Jason Worth, the former Philadelphia outfielder, was invested with some of the horses in the Triple Crown event this year.
And again, he can afford the hobby.
Yes, he can, and he enjoys it.
Yes.
The next question is, would you please explain the 4 C's of investing? Could you tell us what the 4 C's are, Ed?
First of all, you've already listed the 4 C's, which are capacity, complexity, contribution, and craftsmanship. Very frankly, I read the definitions of these, and for us to try to explain them, it would almost be like taking a semester course in college, because they're extremely complicated, and very frankly, I don't feel there are any reasonable guide, because they are so complicated, that what you really need more is what Buffett talks about, is you should have... Warren Buffett is you have a goal for your investment. You balance your investments. You try to keep your fees low, and you're disciplined that you don't panic when the market crashes and so on. So basically, there are a fairly good guidelines by different people that really, and they're pretty much under this. The other one, of course, Buffett's actually are 3. It's never lose money, focus on the long term, and know what you're investing in so you understand the companies, which of course he has somewhat changed that because he has started to invest in high tech and he admits he doesn't understand it.
Could you repeat those three very quickly, Ed, please?
Never lose money.
Okay.
Focus on the long term and know what you're investing in.
Okay. All right. Our next viewer asks, do you subscribe to the informal rule that investments should be made across countries in proportion to their size? In other words, if Canada is 3% of the world economy, should one invest 3% of one's total international investments in Canada? What do you think?
My answer is obviously overwhelmingly no. Obviously, that would mean you would invest, since China is by far, or you could argue the second largest, that you would have most of your investments in China and the United States probably equally. I do not think so. In the same way, do you need to have in all the different foreign investments? Because if you're going to get in the size of the country and put them all together, you'd have more than your investors outside of America. I think the average person should invest in American companies where there's better reporting, better controls, and therefore, and very frankly, lots of American countries operate throughout the world. So indirectly, when you buy Coca-Cola, Coke is all over the world. I don't care where you go. So really, Coke is a semi-international company. So really, the answer is no.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to put two questions together. But this next one is, Mr. Arnold, do you believe in the 7% loss rule? The 7% loss
again, rule. It's not. It's I believe, Charlie, isn't it 7% expenditure rule?
Basically, could be. This is what the viewer is saying.
Well, basically, I think what you're talking about is that you should spend 7% of your assets each year when you're in retirement. That way, they will last through your retirement. The answer is still, again, one size doesn't fit all. And that's what this tries to fit, because it depends on what you want to do in retirement. For that matter, it depends upon your age right now. It depends upon, obviously, what assets you have and what the quality of life you expect. So that really there's so many variables that I really don't think that the 7% rule applies to. It's one size fits all, and one size doesn't fit all.
Okay. Well, let's combine these two questions that came in. I was told by my friends to only buy investments that are worth owning forever. What do you think is worth owning forever? And we can combine that with, should our financial advisors know what is unique or proprietary about each company's products that we are considering investing in?
Okay, well, for once, I'm going to sort of semi-break my rule. I'm going to give a sort of a pretty raw recommendation, even though it's a broad recommendation. Number one, finding a forever stock is extremely difficult. I'm going to just give you some examples here. That, first of all, the S&P in the last 10 years is up 250%. The Dow is up 236%. The so-called NASDAQ funds, which are not the whole NASDAQ, but the funds that invest in NASDAQ, are up 500%. Yet if I go to the companies, P&G, which is a very good company, is only up 100%. Unilever, which is an ESG company, is only up 20%. Cheesecake Factory, which is my favorite restaurant, is down actually 10%. Colgate, again, a very good company, is only up 60%. Yes, if you'd have picked Coke, as Buffett did, it's up 800%. That's a fantastically successful company. And vice versa, if you'd have bought Berkshire Hathaway, which of course is Buffett's company, it's up 320%. So when you look at this, I have a whole bunch of other ones here. Ford is down 25%. Kimberly-Clark is up 25%. They're really, these are all very good companies. They didn't do as good as the S&P or the Dow. So my recommendation, and therefore this is the same with the financial advisors, this is also what I've read many times, 90% of financial advisors are outperformed by the index. Partly because the index is charged next to no fee or 0.02, which is $20 per 10,000 or something. It's a very, very small fee, whereas your financial advisor charges 2%, not 0.02, but 2%. So therefore, he cannot make up the difference. So my recommendation, which I normally don't do, is, in my opinion, for the average person to invest in the S&P or the Dow or the NASDAQ, or even better yet, invest in half in the S&P and half in the NASDAQ. Now realizing the NASDAQ fund is not what it appears. It is not the index of the entire NASDAQ. It's specific companies, just as the S&P is theoretically 500 stocks, but realistic it's only like 100 because it's weighted heavily on the bigger companies that are a way higher percentage. In the case of the NASDAQ index, the largest holding is almost 8.5% is Microsoft, down to Costco is the 10th biggest holding at 2.7%. That really what you have here is, if you take those two indexes, you're really investing probably in about 100 companies. Over a great range, NASDAQ tends to be more technology oriented, but not completely. It's in, obviously, Costco, it's in retail. So you really have a broad brush of the economy. And if you put the two of those together, you're at 300 and some percent over the last 10 years. That's going to equal what Berkshire has, which Berkshire really is a holding company also. They own their biggest single holding they've owned forever, and I was shocked when I looked at Coke. I didn't realize how well it has done, but specifically in the last 5 years, and specifically in the last year, it's moved substantially. And it's a worldwide company, so you're invested in theoretically in the world. But again, rather than trying to say, I'll put all my eggs in Coke, no, but it's in the index, one of them, and it's a major factor. So really, right now, there is obviously different ones. And again, I think the best thing to do is, if you look on our website, Susquehanna's, we will list the symbols of the different, if you want to specifically invest in the NASDAQ index. There's a half a dozen, there's more, actually, I'm just going to list a half dozen of them, that the names of the companies, like Fidelity and Vanguard and Schwabb and so on, that all have funds in the NASDAQ. Of course, the S&P is here. And there's S&P. Ironically, Fidelity's S&P, because they don't call it an S&P fund. They don't pay royalty to S&P. So actually, they have no fees. So therefore, theoretically, they perform 4.6%, and the other ones perform 4.5% in whatever this time frame was that I saw in the index. So basically, you have a variety of funds you could invest in, ETFs, and basically, and combining the two index type things. I mean, as an example, the Russell 5, which is small cap stocks, has not done well. It's under 100%. Now, you may say, well, in the future, I think small cap's going to do better. So you can invest in that. There's a fund for that. But rather than going with an advisor, and you might even pay an advisor a flat fee to help you pick some funds, but you don't need him to manage it.
Okay.
You got to buy and hold. That's the biggest thing.
In the minute before we go to our break between our segments, could you tell our viewers how you can tell how liquid a potential investment might be? Well,
basically, it's very simple. You go to the stock market and check what is the volume, and volume both in the number of shares and the dollars. And that's, again, the advantage of an ETF that I talked about. They have very large funds. They're extremely effective. The general statement is you sell a stock, in 4 days you get your money. And if you were to buy a smaller company and you had a fair number of shares, you'd have to maybe sell it over a period of time, a couple days, because you don't want to affect the market. But basically, if you're in any large company, I would say your 1,000 shares or whatever you had would not affect it, and you could sell it in that 4-day time frame. You could basically give it to your broker. Now, again, you would want to put a range in how you sell it. You just don't say sell at market, because they sometimes manipulate that a little bit. But basically, you can sell it pretty quickly. Assume the stock has high volume, and if you're in small caps, then you've got to spread it out.
Okay, let's take a break here. We'll be back in just a minute, and I want to again encourage viewers to send their questions for Mr. Arnold to the email address that's on the screen at the bottom, and we'll repeat that at the end of the show again, but we encourage you to send your questions, and we'll be right back after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
And we're back with Mr. Ed Arnold, who is the president and chairman of Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, with the Arnold Report. And we've covered a lot of ground already, and there's some other interesting questions here that remain, Ed, in the second half of the show. This is quite topical today. I wish to show support for Israel in the world today. What investment should I consider making to do so?
Again, I would never recommend that you consider individual stocks. There are several funds, I happen to just pick 5 of them here, that are ETFs where you can invest in. The biggest one, it's iShares MSCI Israel. And again, on our website, we will list these symbols of these funds. The other is ARC Israel Innovations, Blue Star Israel, Vanguard Israel, and Defiance Israel Fixed Income. These are all ways you can invest. These companies strictly invest in Israel. They have different tactics. The first one is far larger than the rest. But again, these are all reputable companies. So basically, you can look at them and decide, but that would be the easiest way to invest in Israel.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much. That's a piece of information that's not readily available, I think, to most of us. How should business owners prepare to deal with AI, artificial intelligence? This is very much in the news as well. What could you tell business owners? How should they deal with AI?
Well, very frankly, and this has come from somebody who doesn't like consultants, and in my life I've used very few consultants, but you know what you don't know. And in this case, I don't know, I don't understand, and I don't know exactly how it would apply to my business. If I was still in business, AI, I would need a consultant. That would be a challenge to find one that, number one, is knowledgeable in AI, which of course there's a bunch of them claim, and obviously finding one that's more interested in my business, which was logistics. So overall, my thing is that a consultant will help you with your strategy, with your product development, with your platform modernization, the digital operations. This is what consultants do. And very frankly, this is what you need. In my opinion, very simply, you're going to have to work at finding a quality consultant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, this one is another interesting question here that a viewer submitted, Ed. This viewer says, recently regulators put forth a plan to ban...
Oh, excuse me, Charlie, I did want to... we're going to list these. There's 5 consultants, and again, it'll be on Susquehanna's website, the actual companies. So this will give you a guide.
For dealing with AI.
These are consultants. Again, I do not know them. They're just fairly large, and I found a reference list. They were recommended by this particular group.
Okay, well that's very useful. Thank you, Ed. Recently, regulators put forth a plan to ban derivative contracts based on political elections, athletic competitions, and award contests in a bid to clarify the boundaries between financial markets and gambling. Do you think this is a good development, and what is your opinion of their plan?
Now, you got to realize that I am somewhat biased. I do not like these arbitrary contracts. They're high risk. They can, if somebody with a fair number of dollars can manipulate the market through them, because it doesn't take a lot of money per contract. And therefore, this rule, to me, doesn't seem bad. Now, again, but you've got to realize I am not particularly in favor of these type contracts, and so to restrict them, and this isn't a giant restriction. It isn't really that aggressive a law.
Okay. Well, going on, this is, there are two big questions that the viewers have also submitted. This person says, I truly need your advice. I need to know what your long-term prediction is for inflation in our economy this year.
Well, okay, I guess I can put it this way. I am not optimistic. Realizing that inflation, first of all, inflation numbers are imprecise. And I say they're imprecise, even if the government really tried to do a good job, which they don't, they are manipulating them. But because what's inflation for you and inflation for me, if you're an older person, you have no debt, you own your house, and et cetera. But if you're a young person where the cost of rent is a big deal and the cost of traveling around and so on. So really, the inflation index for any two individuals is quite different. So, but overall, the fact still remains that our government is going to war, obviously. Joe Biden, as far as I'm concerned, hates his country, but because he wants world government. But the biggest thing is the greatest strength America has is its energy resources, and he's going to war with those. Well, you go to war with energy resources, you will make them more scarce. You make them more scarce, you make them more expensive. And so therefore, obviously, energy is not going to get less expensive if we, in fact, are restricting people's ability to find more sources, obviously drilling. Also, the other thing that has happened, which is again a form of energy, which people don't seem to realize, your electric car, all these electric things he wants you to use, need power plants. Power plants right now, fact, this is an undisputed fact, approximately 20% of our energy comes from coal. 40% comes from natural gas. That's 60% of our present electric generating power. Power does not come from the wires that come to your house. They come from power plants. So therefore, because of also AI, which takes tremendous computing power, these new computer centers take tremendous amount of energy. So again, we're predicting, from whatever I've seen, we're going to need 20% more electricity. This is assuming that this, because of the way we're requiring it because of AI. But again, if we have more and more electric cars, more and more electricity. Well, therefore, to reduce, which is what his goal is, to reduce 20% of our electric capacity, a la getting rid of, and right now, only 20% comes from alternative energy. And that's even a false number, because 8% of that 20% is thermal, dams. The latest news I saw, and ironically, I had just been there last summer, the Snake River, in one particular area around the state of Washington, there was 4 dams that they've been fighting about for years. The Indians claim and the salmon claim and all sorts of things. They just tore them down. They tore the last of the 4 dams down. They produced electricity. Now they're going to have to replace that. Well, the point is that yes, they're going to build wind farms or solar, I don't know what, because in the state of Washington, I don't think solar is too practical, but I could be wrong. But definitely, you're not going to increase that 8% of alternative energy in thermodynamics dams, because you want to tear them down. So now we're really getting to what produces presently something in the area of 11% of our energy is somehow going to have to produce increased at least 5-6-fold. Well, we know already, again, these windmills, they finally stopped them off the coast of Jersey. They're killing the whales and the dolphins. Somehow that didn't seem to matter to anybody. In fact, our government allowed them to kill so many whales. In the contract, it actually said, as long as you don't kill more than this many whales, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Well, evidently, for reasons that the economy of building windmills offshore, that they actually, the largest company that builds windmills offshore, shut it down, lost $6 billion. Our government wasted $1.5 billion. So really, where is this energy going to come from? We're saying from alternative. Hold it. Wind and solar, if we were going to make all our energy from those, and that's still the main 2 alternative energy since we're getting rid of dams, we'd have to cover the country. Mm-hmm. So, and the cost, of course, back to inflation and what it costs in retirement, energy is going to get way more expensive because contrary to what they say, yes, the cost of making electricity has come down substantially from wind and solar, but it was also extremely high. So that doesn't mean that if you take the whole cost, including the environmental cost, right now what we're saying, if we were going to push solar, we're saying let China control us completely. Because 90% of your solar components come from China.
Well, it's interesting when we look at inflation and inflation figures, Ed, because as you have said many times, and when we go back to the Clinton administration, they specifically took out food and fuel from inflation calculations. So the inflation rate would look better for them, and government continues to play with these statistics in ways that make themselves look better.
All the inflation numbers you're seeing do not include those two biggest items, which are normal to the average person, the two most important things, especially food. And that's the other thing, as is happening now more so, it indirectly at this moment, but more directly in Europe, they're forcing farms to shut down. Besides going to a war on energy, our new woke governments, including obviously the Biden administration in this country, are going more and more to war with farmers. They are making fertilizer way more difficult. They're making it more expensive. Obviously, fuel is a big item in farming, and of course the transporting thereof. So really, farming is becoming more expensive. But also, if we follow Europe's example, we will start to actually force farms to close down. So we're going to put the price of food up more because of supply and demand.
This war has really been evident in Holland, has it not?
That's correct. Which is the most efficient farming country, I'm told, in the world.
Now, the interesting item about hydropower, which you mentioned as well, is we're tearing down dams for the fish. But my question would be, why not emphasize fish ladders, fish escalators, and do those in a very big way, in a much more enhanced way than we've done in the past, so you can keep and maintain hydropower?
Well, it's sort of interesting on this fish. I happened to, a couple of years ago, each year I go 2 weeks and travel around the West. And that particular trip, I went to Oregon and Washington. Well, you have the Columbia River. Columbia River has a tremendous number of dams with very good fish ladders. Fish ladders are quite interesting. I think the fish are very happy. It's probably easier than when they had to go the old way. But anyway, despite the fact that in every place you go, you see hatcheries, fish hatcheries, fish hatcheries. Yet I read an article that said, we are putting more salmon in the ocean than ever before, but they're not coming back. Now, nobody seems to know what's happened to them. My suggestion would be, talk to Japan, Russia, and China, who are fishing like mad. Maybe, I don't know. But all I know is that we are continuing to say we got to produce more salmon, but we're putting salmon go out to sea and then they come back. They're not coming back.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, we've run out of time again, unfortunately, but we are looking for your questions for Mr. Arnold to answer in the next Arnold Report that'll be coming up. Thank you very much for being with us today, Ed. We covered a lot of ground.
And unfortunately, we didn't quite cover as much as I wanted to, but again, time always runs out.
Well, I think you've done a wonderful job, and we'll see you again next week on Behind the Headlines. See you then.